Hello, welcome to my channel Nick Room. Like and subscribe. Why did you come here? Our restaurant is only for wealthy people. The sharp voice of the administrator cut through the cozy hum of the hall. At a round table by the window sat a family, father, mother, and two teenage children. They were black, dressed elegantly, but without flashy brands, calmly discussing the menu and smiling at each other. Their presence seemed to disrupt the usual order of the establishment, where every guest carefully displayed their status. Expensive suits, glittering jewelry, condescending looks. "Excuse me, but I don't quite understand," the father said calmly, raising his eyes to the administrator. His voice was soft, but there was firmness in it. "Our restaurant is intended for an affluent clientele," the administrator stressed each word, as if afraid he wouldn't be understood. "Usually, businessmen, politicians, celebrities come here. You, however, perhaps you should look for a more affordable place." The mother glanced at her husband, then at the children. Hurt flickered in her eyes, but she restrained herself. "We came here to have dinner. Isn't that what a restaurant is for?" she asked quietly. "Please understand." The waiter standing nearby intervened. He lowered his voice, but loud enough for others to hear. "We have a certain reputation. We must monitor who comes in, so as not to scare off our regular clients." Several nearby tables turned their heads. Some watched the scene with interest, others whispered among themselves. The looks were different, some mocking, some sympathetic, but no one intervened. The father looked at his children. His son, fists clenched, was ready to say something, but the father lightly touched his hand, urging calm. "I suppose," the man said, "that you don't have a sign on the door saying, 'Entry for the rich only.' And I haven't seen such a law." "Formally, yes." The administrator hesitated but quickly regained his confidence. "But there are norms of decency. There is an image, and we must maintain it." The daughter, about 16, lifted her eyes and suddenly spoke in a clear, ringing voice. "And does our skin color ruin your image?" The hall froze for a second. Even the music seemed to fade. The administrator turned pale, then flushed, and tried to respond, but the words stuck in his throat. "Young lady," he finally said, "you don't understand. This just isn't the place for you." The mother sighed. In her eyes was pain, but also pride for her daughter, who had voiced the question so directly. "We will leave if you truly want us to," she said quietly. "But know this, you're sending us away not because we are poor, but because you decided to judge us by the color of our skin." The administrator grimaced, but remained silent. At that moment, one of the guests, a man in his 50s, in an expensive suit, approached the table. He looked at the family for a while, then at the administrator. "I would like to point out," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "that these people are behaving far more decently than the staff who allow themselves such remarks. If status is more important to you than humanity, then I will reconsider whether I want to remain your client." The hall buzzed. Some nodded approvingly, others turned away in irritation. The administrator lost his confidence, began to make excuses, but his words sounded increasingly pitiful. The father calmly stood up. "We will stay," he said firmly. "We came here as a family to spend the evening together, and if someone thinks they have the right to take that from us, let them explain it not to us, but to their children, when they grow up and ask why the world is so unfair." The waiter lowered his eyes. The tray in his hands trembled. The children sat down again. In their eyes, there was fear, but also pride for their parents. They understood. Something important was being decided now, something greater than just dinner. The administrator nervously looked around, then leaned toward the father and whispered, "You must understand, there are people here who could complain. We risk losing face." "You've already lost face," the man replied calmly. "And earning back respect will be far more difficult." At that moment, another waiter, younger and with a friendly smile, approached the table. He placed water and menus before the family. "Good evening," he said. "I'll be your server. May I recommend our signature dish? The administrator flushed, wanted to object, but something in the father's gaze stopped him. The family placed their order, but the atmosphere in the hall had already changed. People whispered, some approving, some not, and the father, sitting at the table, thought about how many more years it would take before such scenes stopped being a part of their lives. He didn't know that ahead lay a meeting that would forever change the fate of this restaurant. The waiter with the friendly smile approached again, holding a notepad. His politeness was strikingly different from the administrator's cold wariness. "Have you chosen anything?" he asked, as if nothing unpleasant had happened in the last 10 minutes. The father smiled. "Yes, we'll try your signature dish, and for the children, bring pasta." The waiter nodded and left, but the feeling of heavy stares lingered. The family could sense how many guests continued to watch them, as if they had become a sort of spectacle for the dining hall. The mother adjusted the napkin on her lap and said quietly, "Sometimes I think people will never change. It's easier for them to judge by skin color than by actions. And I think," the son objected, "that we must teach them differently. If we stay silent, they'll keep believing they're right." The father looked at his son with a slight smile. "Teach them by your example. But remember, there's a difference between defending dignity and pointless arguing. Today, we just want to have dinner." The son nodded, though the fire of resentment still smoldered in his eyes. Meanwhile, the administrator still couldn't settle himself. He whispered with the waiters, nodded toward the family, nervously rubbed his hands. It worried him that the situation had spun out of control. In his mind, this evening was supposed to end quickly. The unwanted guests would leave on their own, and the restaurant's reputation would remain unshaken. But the family wasn't planning on leaving. Soon the food arrived. The dishes were exquisite, beautifully presented, yet each bite carried the bitter taste of injustice. The family tried to smile, to keep conversation going, but they could still feel the atmosphere of alienation. At a neighboring table, a young white couple, clearly well off, whispered to each other, "Look how confidently they sit. Almost like the place belongs to them. Probably want to feel equal. How amusing." The words were spoken softly, but loud enough for the family to hear. The daughter lowered her eyes, her hands trembling. The mother placed a hand on her shoulder. "Don't listen, dear. Such people will always exist, but the truth is stronger than their words." At that moment, the father lifted his head and looked directly at the couple. His gaze was calm, yet so firm that the two immediately fell silent. The minutes dragged slowly. Music played again in the restaurant, but the tension in the air did not fade. Suddenly, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit approached the table. He was a regular client, known by many in the hall. His face radiated cold arrogance. "Excuse me," he began, addressing the family, "but I must say this. You see, this is a special establishment. It has always been known for welcoming people of a certain circle. Your presence raises questions." "Questions for whom?" the father asked calmly. "For everyone," the man gestured toward the room. "This restaurant is a symbol. And when people appear here who don't quite fit this atmosphere, the reputation suffers." "You mean we're unfit?" the mother asked. "You understood me perfectly." His voice was cold, steeped in the confidence of impunity. "Perhaps you're respectable people, but still, there are places for everyone." The son stood up sharply, but once again the father placed his hand on his shoulder. "You know," the man said, "it's strange to hear such words in the 21st century. You speak of reputation, but you forget the most important thing, human dignity." The guest sneered. "Dignity? That must be earned." Silence covered the hall. At that moment, an elderly woman entered the restaurant. A waiter helped her with her cane. She looked more modest than the other guests, but walked with pride. Seeing the scene, she stopped and said loudly, "Dignity cannot be bought with money. It cannot be measured by cars or suits. It is seen in how a person treats others. Her words cut through the atmosphere like a knife. Several guests applauded. The man who had tried to humiliate the family grew flustered and retreated to his table. The administrator turned even paler. The family smiled gratefully at the woman. The mother whispered softly, "Thank you." The woman stepped closer. "I've known this restaurant for many years, and I am ashamed to see it sink to this." She walked to a table, but her words continued to hang in the air. The father looked at his children. "You see, not everyone stays silent, and that means there is hope." For the first time that evening, the daughter smiled. But despite the woman's intervention, the tension did not disappear. The administrator was still plotting how to solve the problem. He was already dialing the restaurant director's number to complain about the incident. The family continued their dinner. They had no intention of leaving, no intention of justifying themselves, but deep inside, each of them knew this story was only beginning. And very soon, those who thought them unfit would face a truth that would change everything. The waiter returned with another dish and placed the plates on the table. He smiled at the children, as if trying to soften the situation a little. But behind him, the administrator appeared again. This time, he carried himself less defiantly, yet irritation was clearly visible in his eyes. "I must apologize," he said, addressing the family, "but we've received complaints from some guests. People feel that your presence here prevents them from feeling comfortable." "Interesting." The father tilted his head slightly. "And in what way exactly are we disturbing them? We are sitting quietly, having dinner, bothering no one." "That cannot always be explained in words," the administrator said with forced restraint, though a hint of disdain slipped into his tone. "But you know what I mean?" The son, unable to hold back, replied sharply, "Yes, we know. You mean our skin color bothers them." Several people at nearby tables, overhearing this, began whispering. Some scoffed, others smiled awkwardly. The atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. The father gave his son a stern look, urging calm, though deep down he was proud of his courage. "My son is right," he said quietly but firmly. "If your clients cannot dine while seeing an ordinary family at the next table, then the problem is not with us." The administrator was about to retort when a man from the far corner of the hall approached. Tall, grey-haired, with the air of a respected figure. Everyone knew him. A local businessman and patron of cultural events. He stood by the family's table and said loudly, "Allow me to add something. I've been coming to this restaurant for many years, but this is the first time I've seen someone being pushed out just because they don't look like everyone else. If this becomes the norm, I will personally reconsider my cooperation with you." His words struck like a blow. Approving exclamations echoed around the room. The administrator faltered, but, trying to save face, muttered, "We're only trying to maintain the standard." "Standards," the businessman interrupted, "are not measured by chandeliers or menu prices. Standards are measured by how you treat people." He returned to his table, and the administrator, lost for words, hurried off toward the kitchen. The mother looked at her husband. "You see, there are people who understand." "Yes," he replied quietly. "But isn't it strange that, for us to simply be left in peace, someone has to stand up and defend us aloud?" The daughter lowered her head. Tears shimmered in her eyes. "Why do they treat us like this? We've done nothing wrong." The father stroked her shoulder. "Because they don't see us as people. To them, we're symbols of something foreign, unfamiliar, frightening. But that's exactly why we must remain strong." Meanwhile, rumors spread throughout the hall. Some guests sided with the family. Others whispered that things are going downhill. In this storm of opinions, the family sat quietly, trying to preserve their dignity. But the conflict wasn't over. A few minutes later, the restaurant's manager himself appeared, a man in an expensive suit, with the face of someone accustomed to command. He approached the table and said, "Good evening. I've been informed of the situation. I must ask you to leave the establishment." The father looked up. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that your presence here causes tension. We must ensure the comfort of the majority." "Interesting." The father smiled without joy. "So discrimination is now called caring for the majority?" The manager frowned. "I'm asking you to leave quietly. There's no need to create a scene." The son suddenly jumped up. "You're the one creating a scene. We just want to have dinner like everyone else." Several guests began applauding. Others shook their heads disapprovingly. The atmosphere grew almost explosive. The father sat his son down again and spoke calmly. "We will not leave. We will pay for our meal. We have insulted no one. If you want to throw us out by force, then do it." The manager turned pale. He clearly hadn't expected such a response. Several waiters froze, unsure of what to do. At that moment, the elderly woman who had defended them earlier rose once more from her seat. "If you expel this family," she said loudly, "then you expel me as well. And I am certain I will not be the only one." Several others stood with her. The grey-haired businessman also joined them. "We will leave too," he added, "but this time, forever." The manager scanned the hall. He realized that if he pushed further now, the restaurant would lose not only customers, but its reputation. Yet admitting he was wrong was unbearable to him. "Fine," he muttered through clenched teeth. "You may finish your dinner." He turned sharply and walked away, leaving behind silence. The father looked at his wife and children. "You see? Sometimes you don't need to shout. You just need not to yield." They picked up their utensils again, trying to regain a sense of calm. But each of them knew this evening would never be erased from memory. And deep inside, a decision was forming. Very soon, everything would change, and the truth would come to light. But for now, the family remained silent. Dinner continued, but it could hardly be called peaceful. The family tried to talk about everyday things, yet the heavy atmosphere pressed down on everyone. The daughter kept casting anxious glances toward the kitchen, while the son gripped his fork so tightly his knuckles turned white. The mother tried to distract the children. "Tomorrow you have a history test, remember?" she gently reminded her son. "Did you study?" "I studied," he answered shortly, but it was clear his thoughts were far from school. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, another drama unfolded. The manager, still stung by his recent defeat, was whispering with the staff. His voice trembled with anger. "They think they can dictate their own rules? This is my restaurant. It has always been for the elite, and it will stay that way. If we allow this, tomorrow everyone will come pouring in." "But," one of the waiters hesitated, "they haven't done anything. They're just eating." "No one asked you." The manager cut him off sharply. "We have to show boundaries." A few minutes later, another waiter approached the family's table. His smile was strained, his eyes cold. "I'm sorry, but one of your dishes is unavailable. Perhaps you'd like to choose something else?" he said in a tone clearly meant to cause discomfort. The father looked at him calmly. "Interesting. That same dish was just served to the next table." The waiter faltered, then quickly recovered. "Perhaps that was the last order." "Then bring what you have," the father said firmly. The waiter left, but the situation was obvious now. They would try to wear the family down with small humiliations, pushing them to leave on their own. 10 minutes later, the food arrived lukewarm. The waiter set it down without the usual courtesy, and the son was about to protest, but his father stopped him with a look. "Don't get angry," he said quietly. "That's exactly what they want." But the family's resilience only enraged the manager further. He approached the table himself this time, accompanied by a security guard. "I don't want to escalate the situation," he began coldly. "But you must understand, the restaurant has the right to refuse service." "Under what circumstances?" the father asked. "When it harms the establishment." "We are not harming anyone," the mother said firmly. "It's our skin color that bothers you." Her words hung in the air. Some guests turned away, as if the topic was too uncomfortable. Others, on the contrary, leaned in with interest. The manager pressed his lips together. "I am asking you to leave. Otherwise, I will have to call the police." "Excellent," the father replied calmly. "Call them. Let the police record that you are throwing out a family simply for having dinner." The guard shifted uneasily, hesitant to act. The tension was reaching its peak. At that moment, the elderly woman who had defended them before rose again. Her voice was loud and steady. "If you call the police on this family, I will remain here and give testimony. And I assure you, I will tell everything I've seen." "And I will too." The grey-haired businessman stood up. "I am tired of watching people be humiliated in the 21st century just because they are different." Several others in the hall also rose. The atmosphere boiled over. Some demanded the family be left alone. Others muttered that this had gone too far. The manager turned pale. He had not expected such resistance, but he refused to back down. "This is my restaurant," he hissed, "and I decide who sits here." The father rose from his chair. His movements were calm, but his voice carried steel. "No, this is not your restaurant. This is a restaurant meant for people. And as long as we are people, we have the right to be here." He looked around the hall. "Each of you is deciding right now what this place will be tomorrow. A restaurant for the chosen few, or a restaurant for everyone. A place where people are respected, or a place where they are degraded for the color of their skin." His words rang so loud and firm that even the music seemed to fall silent. The hall grew still. The children looked at their father with pride. They had never seen him so resolute, so unyielding. The manager had no reply. His eyes darted from the family to the guests, from the guard to the waiters. He knew one more wrong move, and the restaurant's reputation would collapse completely. But deep inside, the family knew this wasn't the end. The manager would not let it go. He would look for new ways to humiliate them, to drive them out, to strip them of their dignity. They silently continued their dinner, but each of them felt this night would be a turning point, and very soon the truth would come to light. After the tense exchange, an uneasy silence settled over the hall. Guests returned to their meals, but many eyes still drifted toward the family. It felt as if everyone was waiting for the next act. The manager disappeared for a few minutes, but no one doubted. He wouldn't let the matter rest. The children ate in silence. The daughter kept lowering her fork, unable to swallow a bite. The son, on the contrary, glared around defiantly, ready to leap up at any moment to defend his family. The mother tried to keep up light conversation, but even her smile looked strained. "Everything will be fine," the father whispered. "Just be yourselves. We are stronger than they think." Meanwhile, in the corner of the hall, two waiters whispered hurriedly. One walked over to the bar, and a few minutes later, a bottle of expensive wine was brought to the family's table. "This is a gift from the restaurant," the waiter announced. The father looked at him in surprise. "We didn't order wine." "But the manager insists." The waiter placed the bottle down and hurried away. The mother frowned. "Strange. A moment ago they wanted us out, and now suddenly they're offering gifts." "Careful," the father said quietly. "I don't trust this gesture." He examined the bottle closely. The cork had been opened. The wine had clearly been poured before. "We won't drink this," he decided firmly. "I know all too well what kind of gifts come in situations like this." The son clenched his fists. "They want to paint us as troublemakers. If we refuse, they'll call us ungrateful. If we accept, they'll find another excuse to accuse us." And so it happened. Minutes later, the manager returned with two guests in tow. His face wore a performance of surprise. "What's this I see?" he said loudly, for all to hear. "You were given wine, and you refused? In a place like this, that looks odd." "We refused because it was already opened," the father replied calmly. "Oh, I see," the manager shook his head. "So you're implying we tried to serve you poor quality wine, or perhaps something worse?" A murmur rippled through the hall. Some exchanged glances. The manager had achieved his aim, shifting the focus from discrimination to the family's supposed ingratitude. "We only stated the truth," the mother interjected. "No sane person would drink opened wine without knowing where it came from." "But that is an insult to our restaurant." The manager raised his voice, gesturing dramatically. "You cast doubt on the honesty of our staff." The son snapped. "It isn't us casting doubt on you. It's your words and actions." The hum of voices grew louder. Some nodded in agreement. Others eyed the family skeptically. The hall was splitting into two camps. At that moment, the young waiter, who had been kind from the start, approached the table. He looked nervous, but found the courage to speak. "I'm sorry, but I saw the manager give the order to bring that opened wine. He wanted the family to drink it." The hall fell silent. Every eye turned to the manager. His face drained of color, then flushed red, but he quickly pulled himself together. Lies. This boy doesn't know how to do his job and wants to deflect blame. The waiter trembled, but continued, "I saw it with my own eyes, and this isn't the first time. It's been done before, usually to get rid of guests they don't like." The hall erupted in whispers. Now, many looked not at the family, but at the manager. His authority was crumbling before their eyes. The father rose. His voice was calm, but each phrase felt like a verdict. "You see how easily a person's dignity can be stripped away. With a single word, a single suspicion. They tried to paint us as ungrateful. Before that, as outsiders, as unfit. All just to make us leave. But we will not leave." He turned to the guests. "Tonight it was done to us. Tomorrow it could be any one of you. And then the question will not be about our family, but about yours." His words echoed through the hall. People exchanged glances. In their eyes flickered doubt, shame, and dawning understanding. The manager's breathing grew heavy. He could feel control slipping away. "Enough!" he shouted. "You will not disgrace my establishment any further." He gestured to the security guard, but the guard did not move. For the first time that evening, he looked directly at the family, then at the manager, and stood still. "Dad, look," the son whispered. He didn't obey. The father nodded. Sometimes truth is stronger than orders. The family sat back down. They knew the battle wasn't over. But now the scales had tipped. More and more people were beginning to see that they were not unfit. They were simply a family who wanted to have dinner in peace. And deep down, each of them felt it. The moment when the truth about them would be revealed was close. But for now, silence. For now, the test. The manager stood in the center of the hall, his face tense, lips twitching. He knew he was losing control, losing authority. His scheme with the gifted wine had failed. The waiter had betrayed him, and now the guests were beginning to doubt not the family, but him. But he wasn't about to give up. Pulling out his phone, he made several calls, and 10 minutes later reappeared, accompanied by 2 uniformed police officers. A dead silence fell over the room. "There they are," the manager said loudly, pointing at the family. "These people came into our restaurant, refused to pay for their order, and caused a scene." The family froze. The children exchanged terrified looks, and the mother stood, her voice quiet but steady. "That's a lie. We haven't even received the bill yet." But the manager pressed on. "They tried to leave without paying and insulted the staff. I had no choice but to call the police." A wave of outrage rippled through the hall. The grey-haired businessman rose from his seat. "That is not true. I've been watching since the beginning. These people did nothing of the sort." The elderly woman also stood. "You're lying, and everyone here knows it." The manager pretended not to hear. He stepped closer to the police, trying to add weight to his accusations. "I demand they be removed immediately." One of the officers looked at the family and asked, "Is it true you plan to leave without paying?" The father slowly stood. His voice was calm, but firm. No, we came here as ordinary customers. We ordered dinner, sat down, and just wanted to spend time together. From the very start, we were treated as outsiders. We were told outright that this restaurant is not for people like us. Then they tried to serve us opened wine, and now they accuse us of something we never did. The officer frowned. He turned to the guests. Are there witnesses? The hall erupted. One after another, people spoke up to confirm the family's account. Some recalled the scene with the administrator, others the wine, others the repeated hints for the family to leave. I confirm it, said the grey-haired businessman. They broke no rules. And I, added the elderly woman. They behaved with dignity, unlike the staff. Applause broke out in the hall, not thunderous, but strong and steady. The manager turned pale. His plan was collapsing before everyone's eyes. He tried to shout over the voices, "They're all lying. You don't understand who you're dealing with. These people are trying to disgrace our establishment." But his words sounded weaker and weaker. The officers exchanged glances, then one said, "We see no sign of wrongdoing. On the contrary, it seems this family was the target of prejudice." The manager exploded. "Prejudice? This is an elite restaurant. We must maintain standards. If we let anyone in, tomorrow this will become a cheap diner." His voice carried no confidence now, only rage and desperation. The father stepped forward, his tone calm, but ringing through the hall. "You're not afraid for the restaurant. You're afraid of losing control. You've grown used to deciding who is worthy and who is not. But dignity is not defined by skin color or a bank account." His words unleashed a storm of applause. Many guests rose to their feet. The atmosphere had shifted. Now the hall stood with the family. Realizing his defeat, the manager exhaled and spat out, "Get out! You don't belong here." "No," the father replied firmly. "We will finish our dinner." They sat back down. The police, seeing the matter resolved, left. The manager remained standing, fists clenched, his face twisted in fury. But he could do nothing. The entire hall had seen his true face. The mother took her daughter's hand. "You see," she whispered, "truth always breaks through, even when no one wants to hear it at first." The daughter smiled through tears. And will they? Will they ever understand? The father looked at the manager, who had lowered his eyes and tried to slip into the shadows of the hall. "Perhaps not all," he answered. "But what matters is that tonight something changed." The family continued their meal as though nothing had happened. But each knew this evening would remain etched not only in their memories, but in the memory of the entire restaurant. For now, they kept silent about who they really were. But that secret would soon become the weapon that changed everything. After the police left, the restaurant felt split in two. On one side were those who still cast disapproving glances at the family. On the other, those who looked at them with respect for their resilience. The atmosphere was tense, but no longer openly hostile. The manager disappeared into his office, but everyone knew he was preparing his next move. The waiters continued their work, though their eyes betrayed an inner struggle. Some were ashamed of what was happening, some were afraid of losing their jobs, and some simply watched the family with curiosity, wondering why they refused to leave despite all the pressure. The mother gently said to the children, "Remember this evening. It's more important than any lesson at school. Life won't always be fair, but we must learn to hold our heads high." The son nodded but clenched his teeth. One day this will change, and people like them will have to answer for their actions. Just then, a group of new guests entered, 3 men in expensive suits. The manager rushed out to greet them, bowing obsequiously. "Gentlemen," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "what an honor to see you here. Tonight is a special evening." The men walked into the hall and sat near the family. Their eyes immediately fell on them. The manager seized the chance. "Forgive me that you have to witness this. These people have been sitting here for hours, disturbing the restaurant, but I'll do everything I can to resolve the situation." One of the men snorted. "And what exactly is the problem?" The manager lowered his voice, though still loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "They've been acting defiant, refusing to leave. But they don't have the means to pay." The words fell like a stone. Many guests froze. The family exchanged glances in silence. The father took a deep breath but said nothing. He waited. "Are you serious?" asked the businessman who had been present from the start. "Do you have proof?" The manager grinned smugly. "I'll have proof once I bring them the bill. They won't even be able to pay for their dinner." He signaled to a waiter. A moment later, a folder with the bill was placed on the family's table. The air grew taut. Everyone held their breath, waiting. The father opened the bill, studied it, then handed it to his wife. She calmly took out her wallet and placed a gold card on the table. "Charge it to this," she said softly, so only those nearby could hear. The waiter took the card, nodded, and walked away. The manager stood, convinced the card would be declined. He imagined the shame of the family being exposed before everyone. Minutes dragged by. The restaurant was deathly silent. At last the waiter returned and, with a bow, placed the receipt on the table. "Payment was successful. Thank you for your visit." A murmur swept the hall. The manager turned pale, as though he'd seen a ghost. His plan had collapsed completely. The father raised his eyes and said quietly, "We always pay our bills. Always." Several guests broke into applause. The son looked at his father with admiration, and the daughter smiled for the first time that evening. The manager, however, was seething. He couldn't believe he had lost again. Then one of the three men who had just entered stood. Looking at the family, he said, "Forgive my curiosity, but I think I've seen you before. Your face. It's very familiar." The father smiled faintly, but remained silent. "Yes, yes," another chimed in. "I remember. A few months ago I was at the opening of a new restaurant downtown. There was a huge banner with your photo on it." The hall fell into silence. Everyone waited for a response. The family remained quiet until the mother said calmly, "You must be mistaken." But the businessman's words had already planted doubt. Guests exchanged glances and whispered. Curiosity spread. Who were these people, really? The manager, noticing this, grew more nervous. He sensed the danger. If the rumors turned out to be true, his own position would be destroyed. He shot the family a hateful glare and spat out, "Even if they have money, that doesn't make them equal to us." That phrase was the last straw. The hall erupted in noise. Some voiced outrage. Others applauded the family. Many openly expressed their discontent with the manager himself. The father stood and said, "Money does not make people equal. What makes us equal is our humanity, and that, sadly, you have failed to show tonight." He sat back down, and at that moment, many guests understood. The family sitting by the window were not ordinary people. Their confidence, their dignity, their composure revealed them as those accustomed to being in charge. But the family still kept silent. They knew the time to reveal the truth had not yet come. After the card was accepted and approving voices filled the hall, the manager felt the ground slipping beneath him. His eyes darted, his breathing heavy, as though battling with himself. He understood. He was losing. But surrender was not in his nature. He suddenly slammed his palm on the family's table. "You think you've won?" he hissed. "Money can be found anywhere, but you don't belong here. You are not part of this world." The children flinched. The mother rose, her voice cold and steady. "A world where there is only room for hatred isn't worth being part of." The hall froze. Seeing the audience once again turning against him, the manager tried another tactic. He pulled out his phone, scrolled quickly, then held it high, shouting, "Here, I know who they are. This family has already been involved in scandals. I've read articles accusing them of fraud, of tax evasion. It's all here on the internet." He waved the phone, displaying dubious headlines ripped from context. "See?" he shouted to the hall. "They are not who they claim to be. Everything you see is just a mask." Whispers rippled through the room. People exchanged looks. Some nodded, some smirked, but many stared with skepticism. It was obvious the manager was grasping at straws. The father calmly took the phone from him, glanced at the screen, and handed it back. "You know what's funny? Your hatred blinds you so much that you'll believe any lie, as long as it justifies your actions." He sat back down. His voice was quiet, but each phrase cut through the air. The grey-haired businessman rose and said, "I've long known how easily any newspaper article can be bought. I don't believe gossip, especially when it's used as a weapon against an ordinary family who simply wanted dinner." The elderly woman joined in. "All we see tonight is hatred dressed in an expensive suit and the mask of reputation." The hall buzzed. More and more people were siding with the family. The manager was losing control completely. "You're all blind," he screamed. "They are liars, thieves. You think they're so dignified? You know nothing about them." And then a new voice rang out. One of the three men who had arrived earlier stood and said, "Forgive me, but I remember now. I was at a business dinner where a new downtown restaurant was being discussed. This man," he pointed at the father, "stood beside the mayor and cut the ribbon at the opening. That wasn't a banner. I saw him in person." The hall fell into silence. All eyes turned to the family. The daughter squeezed her mother's hand. The son froze. The manager flushed crimson, as if struck. "Lies!" he shouted. "Impossible! They can't be restaurant owners." But the man pressed on firmly. "I'm not mistaken. I'm in business myself, and my memory is excellent. This man was introduced as a co-owner of a restaurant chain." Now the hall exploded with murmurs. People whispered, exchanged astonished glances. Some gasped, others tried to recall if they too had heard about it. The family stayed silent. The father only smiled faintly, confirming nothing. "See?" The manager tried desperately. "They won't even answer. If it were true, they'd admit it." The father raised his eyes and said calmly, "Silence is sometimes the best answer to lies." His words rang with such certainty that many guests broke into applause. The manager was broken. He grabbed his head and muttered, "This can't be true. If it is, then I... He trailed off, realizing he had said too much. The mother looked at her children and said gently, "You don't always have to shout to be heard. Sometimes it's enough simply to be yourself." For the first time that evening, the son smiled. "But now at least they're beginning to understand." The daughter nodded. "And the one who hurt us ended up beneath us." The father glanced at the manager, who staggered back toward the counter. "Sometimes we dig our own graves, deepest of all when we dig them for others." The family returned to their dinner. But now the entire restaurant knew. They were not ordinary guests. Their story was only beginning to unfold, and everyone sensed the ending would be loud. The hall buzzed with whispers. The manager, red-faced and stripped of all authority, still tried to argue, but his words drowned in the noise. All eyes were on the family by the window. Guests no longer looked at them with suspicion. Now their gazes held curiosity, respect, and even a touch of awe. The father calmly set his napkin down beside his plate, wiped his hands, and stood. His tall figure rose above the seated crowd. "Enough," he said firmly. "We've kept silent all evening. We endured insults, hints, slander. We didn't want to prove anything to anyone. But if we are being accused of being outsiders here, then it's time to tell the truth." An absolute silence fell. Even the music stopped. All eyes were on him. He stepped forward. "You say we don't belong here, that we're not worthy of sitting among you. But do you know that it was my family who created the very restaurant chain to which this place belongs?" A collective gasp swept through the room. People exchanged glances. Someone exclaimed, "Is that true?" The father continued, "We own dozens of restaurants across the country. We built them so people could come and feel welcome, regardless of how they look, how much money they have, or what color their skin is. This restaurant is one of ours." The son looked at his father with pride. The daughter squeezed her mother's hand. "Tonight," he went on, "we decided to come here as an ordinary family. Without pomp, without introductions. We simply wanted to spend an evening together. But instead, we were faced with what still exists, even in the 21st century: discrimination. We were told we didn't belong." He turned to the manager, frozen at the counter, unable to speak. "You wanted to throw us out because you thought we were unfit. But the truth is, you are the one unfit for this place. Because a restaurant is not chandeliers and golden glasses. A restaurant is people. It is respect." Applause broke out. Hesitant at first, then louder and louder. Guests rose from their seats, supporting every word. The manager paled, then flushed. He opened his mouth, but no words came. His defeat was clear to all. The elderly woman rose and said, "That is true dignity. You faced humiliation, but stayed calm. Tonight, you gave us all a lesson." The grey-haired businessman added, "And you," he pointed at the manager, "have disgraced not only yourself, but this entire restaurant." The manager bowed his head. The waiters stood off to the side, uncertain. But the atmosphere had shifted completely. The family was no longer outsiders. Now they were the rightful hosts. The mother whispered to her children, "That is why we kept silent. Sometimes the truth must be spoken at the very moment no one expects it." The son lifted his head proudly. "And now they know." The daughter smiled through tears. "And no one can ever again say we don't belong." The father looked across the hall. "Remember this evening. Let it be a lesson for all of us. We may be rich or poor, famous or unknown, but human dignity does not depend on the color of skin. It depends only on how we treat one another." Applause swelled into a standing ovation. Many guests rose, honoring the family. The manager hurried off to his office, head bowed. He knew his career was over. The family sat back down. Now, no one dared cast them a hostile glance. On the contrary, people approached to shake their hands, to apologize, to express respect. The mother smiled at the children. "We only wanted to have dinner, but it turns out we showed them something more." The father nodded. "Sometimes, even one evening can change people." After that evening, the restaurant was never the same again. The truth that the family were in fact the owners of the restaurant chain spread instantly. First inside the dining hall itself, then throughout the city, and within days every local newspaper was writing about the scandal. But the greatest change was felt by the staff, the administrator. The administrator, the first to voice insults, found himself at the centre of public condemnation. His face appeared in the news, quoted with the line, "Our restaurant is only for wealthy people." The words he had spoken so confidently now became the symbol of his downfall. Within the team, people treated him coldly. Those who once nodded along and feared to contradict him now openly said, "You dragged us into this. If you hadn't started it, none of this would have happened." The administrator tried to defend himself. "I was only following the rules. I wanted to protect the restaurant's image." But everyone knew the truth. It hadn't been about rules at all, but about his personal prejudice. The manager. The manager's situation was even worse. His name became notorious. Articles described him as a man willing to humiliate clients for the sake of his own insecurities, just to preserve his order. On social media, he was mocked and turned into memes. He tried to justify himself in interviews, claiming the family had provoked the conflict, insisting it was a mistake by the staff. But the recordings taken by diners crushed his excuses. The cameras had captured every word, every act of humiliation. Rumours spread that he would soon be fired. Still, he continued coming to work, not as the figure of authority he once was, but as a man everyone avoided. The waiters. The waiters were divided. Those who had stayed silent, or even agreed with the administrator, now felt guilty. One admitted to a colleague, "We knew it was wrong, but we said nothing. We were afraid of losing our jobs." Others, however, had found courage. The young waiter who revealed the truth about the wine unexpectedly became a hero in the eyes of both guests and colleagues. People in the hall had applauded him when he dared to speak up, and now many saw him as an example. Yet he himself felt the weight of it. Why did it have to be me, a newcomer, who spoke the obvious? Why did the senior staff stay silent? The security guard. The guard who had refused to carry out the manager's order also drew attention. He was respected for standing on the side of justice. Though he hadn't spoken a word, his silent refusal to lay hands on the innocent was stronger than any speech. Sometimes what matters most isn't what you do, but what you refuse to do, he told a colleague after his shift. The staff atmosphere. From that night on, the staff lived in a strange tension. Some rejoiced that the truth had come out, believing change would finally arrive. Others were afraid. If the family were the true owners, then surely strict inspections, dismissals, and punishments were on the way. Some whispered, "They'll punish everyone. No one will be spared." Others countered, "Maybe they'll give us a chance. Not everyone was against them." The family. The family themselves left the restaurant quietly after the dinner, but their silence spoke louder than any words. They gave no statements to the press, even as journalists surrounded their home and offices. The father told the children, "We must not seek revenge, we must teach, and sometimes the best lesson is consequences." The mother added, "Let each of them think about why they ended up in this position." And the staff did begin to reflect. But despite everything, no one yet knew what decision the family would make. They were the owners, but had not intervened directly. The manager and the administrator lived in constant dread of judgment. The waiters wondered who would stay and who would be dismissed. The atmosphere of waiting was more painful than any punishment. One day, an envelope arrived at the restaurant bearing the golden logo of the chain. Inside was an invitation to a meeting for all staff. "This is the end," the administrator whispered when he saw it. "Or the beginning," said the young waiter who had stood up for the family. Everyone understood. Soon their fate would be decided. But no one yet knew what the owner's verdict would be. On the appointed day, the restaurant was closed to visitors. A sign hung on the door. "Technical break. We apologize for the inconvenience." But inside, there was unusual tension. The entire staff, waiters, administrators, cooks, even cleaners, had gathered in the hall. Normally, such meetings were led by the manager, confident, strict, fond of speeches about reputation and standards. But today, he sat off to the side, head bowed, his hands trembling. The administrator, once arrogant and loud, now avoided everyone's eyes. The young waiter, the one who had found the courage to speak the truth, stood by the wall, trying not to show his nervousness. He felt that today his future would be decided. "Well," whispered one employee, "do you think they'll fire us all?" "I don't know," another replied. "But honestly, I'm afraid." The hall fell silent when the doors opened. The family entered, the same people who had been humiliated here just days earlier. But now they walked calmly, confidently, and with each step, the staff lowered their eyes. The father stopped in the middle of the hall. His voice was quiet, yet carried clearly. "Good morning. I think you all understand why we're here." The mother added, "We want to talk not only about what happened that night, but about the future, about what will happen to this restaurant, and to each of you." The employees exchanged glances. Silence filled the room. The father continued, "We kept quiet for a long time. It hurt us to see that people working in a restaurant belonging to our chain dared to judge guests by their appearance. We came here as an ordinary family, with no intention of testing anyone. But reality revealed more than any report or figure could. His words struck like a verdict. The manager flinched. The administrator buried his face in his hands. The young waiter lifted his head. His heart pounded so loudly he thought everyone could hear it. The mother spoke gently but firmly. We saw everything. We heard everything. And today we are here to decide who is worthy of working here and who has not understood the most important thing: respect for people. Someone in the room sobbed. A waitress covered her face with her hands. Others sat motionless, as if taking an exam with stakes too high. The father's eyes swept across the hall. We are not seeking culprits out of vengeance, but we must understand who among you is ready to change and who remains a prisoner of prejudice. He paused, and in the silence his next words fell like a command. Manager, stand up. The man rose with difficulty, his face deathly pale, his hands shaking. He tried to speak, but no words came. That night, the father said, you did everything you could to humiliate our family. You tried to paint us as liars, as paupers, as frauds. You were willing to call the police, just to preserve your illusion of power. The man lowered his head. No one defended him. Even those who once obeyed his every word were silent now. Coldly, the father said, you will have the chance to explain your actions, but not here. Then his eyes moved to the administrator. You began that evening. Your words lit the spark that started the fire. Our restaurant is only for wealthy people. That's what you said. Do you realize that those words insulted not only us, but the very idea of hospitality? The administrator pressed his lips together and nodded, tears brimming in his eyes. I was wrong, he whispered. I just wanted to seem important. The mother studied him closely. Sometimes the desire to seem important destroys everything around you, especially when it is built on humiliating others. Then the father turned to the young waiter. And you, stand up. The young man rose, heart pounding so hard he feared it would burst from his chest. That night, you alone found the courage to speak the truth. You risked your job, but chose honesty. Remember this. That quality is worth more than any bonus or position. The boy swallowed and whispered, I just couldn't stay silent. And you were right, the father replied. Those who stay silent in the face of injustice become part of it. The hall grew silent again. Everyone waited for the family's decision. Would there be dismissals or a chance to make things right? The father looked at the mother, then at his children. His voice rang firm. Today, we will announce what comes next. The staff held their breath. But at that very moment, the doors burst open and reporters rushed in with cameras. Their flashes blinded the room. Sir, one journalist shouted, is it true you plan to fire the entire staff? What future awaits this restaurant? The staff exchanged horrified looks. Each wanted to know the answer, but none dared to ask. The father stepped forward, turned toward the cameras. The flashes of cameras blinded the hall. The staff flinched. They hadn't expected their internal meeting to become a spectacle for the press. Reporters shouted over one another. Is it true the restaurant will be closed? How do you respond to the manager's behavior? Will the entire staff be fired? The father raised his hand, and instantly the room fell silent. Even the journalists lowered their cameras, sensing the strength in his voice. This restaurant is not just walls and expensive furniture. It is part of our chain, and we have always said, the most important thing here is people. But that night, we saw that for some employees, people meant only those who looked like them. Everyone else was treated as outsiders. He paused, scanning the faces of the staff. We are not going to close the restaurant. On the contrary, we want it to become an example that there is no place for discrimination here. The journalists whispered among themselves. The staff tensed. All were waiting for the crucial decision. The father looked directly at the manager. Your name has become a symbol of arrogance and humiliation. You are no longer the manager of this restaurant. As of today, your duties are terminated. The man turned pale. His hands shook. He wanted to protest, but seeing the approving nods of staff and the press, he bowed his head and slowly walked out. Then the father turned to the administrator. Your words began that night, but at least you found the courage to admit your guilt. We are prepared to give you a chance, not to return to your post, but to start over from the very bottom. If you prove that you respect people, perhaps one day you will rise again. The administrator's lips trembled. He nodded, a tear rolling down his cheek. It was humiliation, but also hope. Next, the father looked to the young waiter. You showed that you deserve to work here. You reminded everyone that truth is more important than fear. We trust you, and from this day, you will be head waiter. The young man could hardly believe his ears. His colleagues looked at him with respect, while he stammered, "Thank you. I'll do my best to live up to it." So the mother addressed the rest of the staff. We will not dismiss everyone, but each of you must understand. What happened that night was not just a mistake. It was a betrayal of the very idea of hospitality. From this day forward, we set a new rule: no discrimination. Not by skin color, not by appearance, not by wealth. Every guest has the right to feel welcome here. The staff nodded. Some sighed with relief. Others bowed their heads in thought. Their faces reflected everything: fear, shame, and hope. The father added, "Remember, it won't just be us watching you. Every guest will be a witness to how you change. And if anyone repeats what happened that night, there will be no second chances." A heavy silence filled the hall. Everyone knew. His words were final. The journalists spoke again, but now their questions were different. Will this become the policy for your entire chain? Do you plan to expand this stand against discrimination? How did your family endure that night? The father answered simply, "We endured it with dignity, and that is what we want to preserve here." He took his wife's hand. The children stood proudly at their side. As the family left the hall, the staff watched them go, some with respect, some with gratitude, and some with guilt that would not fade soon. The young waiter smiled at his colleagues and said quietly, "You see, it could have ended badly, but now we have a chance, and I won't let us waste it." At that moment, it became clear. The restaurant was about to change. Some would leave, unable to accept the new rules. Others would grow. But no one would ever again dare utter the words that began that night. Our restaurant is only for wealthy people. Because now, this restaurant was a symbol of the fight against prejudice. And the truth the family had held in silence so long became not only their victory, but a lesson for everyone.